Hey guys, how's it going? Jason Sensational here. Welcome back to the channel. So for the second champion of the set, we are getting Kayle, the angel kind of justice-seeking warrior thingy. Um, I don't know what I prepared for this intro, so let's just jump into it, I guess.
I am exalted.
All right, so first things first about Kayle, we are getting a new keyword, which is the empowered keyword. Notice that Kayle is a 6-mana 2/6. She has this ability where she is able to scale her attack. So very, of course, thematic with the whole scaling in League of Legends. I +1 attack for each time an ally attacked with increased power. So anything with increased power, like be it a buff spell, be it a weapon equipped, whatever you have, whenever you do that, Kayle automatically gains additional attack. And then when I'm summoned, she also grants allies +1 attack as well, so that if you have any unbuffed allies on board, this automatically just buffs the allies up, and then in which if they attack, it buffs Kayle as well, right? And very critically, this is a grant. So it's not just a give, it is a grant. Now, moving on to the keyword, the empowered keyword. If you guys are not familiar with this keyword quite yet, it just means that when this unit has X amount of power, it gains that text. So you notice here, empowered 6, gain quick attack, and if Kayle has 6 attack, she has quick attack. So realistically, this is a 6-mana, at least like a 6/6 quick attack, which is pretty decent, good stats. Can obviously attack, and then level up round start I have 11 plus power.
Behold the righteous flame, glory and light.
Seeing the animations just hits different. I know they release all the cards, but getting to see the animations is just like something else.
Illumination in divinity. Spare the innocent, punish the wicked. Truth guide my
Yep.
sword.
See how like Kayle gets 4 attack there because,
You are unworthy.
well, I guess you have 4 allies with increased attack. I guess also critically, Kayle scales herself, right?
On wings of fire, hope ascends.
You see this part? You just see like this part right here, like.
On wings of fire, hope ascends.
I could actually care less about the actual animation than like the first 2 seconds. The first 2 seconds, or this like, or this like divine judgment-esque kind of like animation comes up, and then it's like, look at that, like, oh, god damn, my god, they're really just pulling out all the strings for the animation budgets now, huh?
On wings of fire, hope ascends.
But even like, like just the exalted form is, oh. I feel like for the animations, they really like sort of simplified it down to specifically like the champions, right? So in Aatrox, he gets the wings. Kayle, becomes the exalted form, and that's it, right? That's all it is. It's just the champion. It's just, a simple, whether it be like a simple sort of just some indication that it's like, increasing in power, whether it be using their ult, becoming the exalted form, whatever it is. Just super simple, super clean, and then just the additional effects of the cards and stuff. Okay, but sort of same thing. Kayle does gain Overwhelm, which, she's obviously looking like this finisher card. She scales her own attack. She has a quick attack and Overwhelm. Now, when she's summoned or level up, she also grants allies +1/+1. So as an additional sort of reward, you get this additional buff, which can be useful in helping your other empowered units. And then she also gains double attack when she's empowered 16. So, I mean, double attack Overwhelm on just one unit, like classic finisher, right?
Desire rid this world of corruption.
All are guilty, fool.
Holy
Open
moly.
your eyes.
She is returned. My fears were well founded.
Oh, yeah, that's a scam. I mean, that's such a scam, man. You can't do that. You just okay. To be fair, Zilani wasn't actually leveled, but if just hypothetically, Zilani had like 16 power there, and then in this preview they just hushed her on this cataclysm. That would have been an actual scam. Although Hush do be looking kind of good.
Our devotion will not be broken.
All right, let's talk some cards. I mean, Kayle, super cool animations. That just blew me away, right? Like, look at the cards, you can kind of rate just whatever, but when you see that animation, it's like, man, does that make me want to play it? All right, let's talk. So, Kayle is. I think Kayle is quite strong, right? You look at other 6-cost champs, you have things like Aatrox, which is more of like an engine rather than a finisher himself, although he might have 9 power. But Kayle herself has all the keywords she needs, right? She gets overwhelm, she gets double attack potentially. She scales her own power as well as the power of her allies. And of course, she's in target, right? So you have access to spell shield cards like Bastion or the Expanse's protection, things like that. So you have good protection tools built in the region. You have, and I think a lot of support cards for general set, but let's talk about her set as well. So Kayle's Divine Judgment, her champion spell, give burst speed, 6 mana, give an ally can't take damage or die this round, give all allies +1/+0 this round, create a Kayle in your deck. I mean, just right off the bat, right? We're talking about protection in region. Now you have just Kayle's champion spell as well. Giving this I can't die is sort of like a pseudo bastion, potentially even better in certain cases, except against silences like Hush, right? Because if you try to vengeance, say Kayle like onto like a divine judgment, that's just an absolute blowout and you can't do anything about it, right? So I think that like the existence of Kayle's spell makes it really, really difficult to even attempt to kill Kayle. Especially because this is at burst, right? If this was fast, like the Demacia card, then I think there's slightly more counterplay to it. But because this is burst, which I find a little bit bizarre, I won't lie. But I assume that it's burst only because of the second clause, which is give all allies +1/+0 this round. It's not even true. That doesn't have to be burst either. But this card seems a little bit weird to be burst because I think that, any sort of vengeance deck, any sort of removal based deck that isn't running mini morph or B Hush is going to have an absolute of a nightmare time dealing with Kayle, right? Which inherently makes her quite powerful, because this is one of, if not the best protection spells that you don't have to main deck, right? Because if you're running 3 copies of Kayle, well, chances are you draw a second Kayle and then you just automatically have this protection card. Not to mention you can still also be playing cards like Bastion, right? So I mean, straight off the bat, even if you didn't have this like give all allies +1/+0 this round, I think this just being Kayle's spell is just really insane. I mean, I already think that like just makes Kayle a decently reliable finisher just by herself, despite her being 6 mana, despite her needing this like sort of setup. I think this just sort of just gives it a good enough reason and consistency. Now, her set is around this sort of empowered keyword, so we'll talk about some of the units first before we get into these. And there are a lot more empowered units than just simply these. We'll probably review them in the full set review later, but I think these give a general idea of what empowered does overall. You have this 3 mana 2/4, but when empowered, it gains elusive. And then you have Mihira, Aspect of Justice, a 5 mana 1/1. But this is sort of like a pseudo engine itself. On round end, grant allies in play and in hand +1/+1. So also very good at buffing up Kayle, giving empowered, things like that. And then when Mihira it's empowered 5, she gets elusive, lifesteal, and overwhelm. So quite high payoffs for cards like this if you are able to buff it in hand, or if you're able to just stick this for a couple turns and get this sort of payoff. And of course, Kayle herself also grants other allies +1 +0 if you get it off as well. Now there are some what I find really bizarre is that they put this blinding light skill in here, but they didn't actually put the unit that's tied to this. So I think that's like a slight error on their just like reveal side of things. But there is a unit, it's a 5 mana 2/7 with on play stun any units with, you know, less power than me. So also just a very good in-hand buff target. Now, in terms of in-hand buff target, there's not actually that many. They do release this new card, Purifying Flames, which is a 4 mana burst, but it only grants an ally in hand +2/+3 and another one +2/+2, which is really good for sort of setting up empowered. But for the most part, all of the empowered units don't need to be buffed in hand, right? You can buff them after you play them, which is usually more efficient, as well as better proactive or better reactiveness. It's only just this one card really so far, at least, that has this I need to be buffed in hand in order to be more impactful kind of card. And I guess there is also Celestial Blessing, which is a 2 mana burst speed card, grants an ally in play and an ally in hand +1/+1. Now, I actually think that this card is actually really fantastic. It's sort of Pale Cascade-esque, right? Where it's giving +1/+1, except this is grant. It doesn't draw you a card, but it also grants another ally in hand +1/+1, which I think is going to be really good for Kayle decks overall, because, you know, if you look at empowered, you know, if you make this a 3/5, it's suddenly just a 3/5, or if you just give this +1/+1, it's suddenly just a 3/5 elusive. You can give cards like the stun card +1/+1. And I think overall there'll be good targets. I think something also to note about empowered cards themselves is just because you're in Targon, you also have a lot of cards that help you boost the empowered, right? You have Esmus, you have Darkened Lodestone, you have gems from Mountain Goat, you even have like things like Mentored Stones, things like that. So there's a lot of different ways of enabling empowered. So I don't think that it's a very high condition, but rather you just want to look more at, is it worth or is it good enough to play, right? And I think for the most part, some of these look pretty strong. Lastly, we have Zilani, second form. She was sort of teased, but then got like shafted by the silence. Because she looks pretty insane. As a 7 mana overall, she has +2/+2 for each ally that's died with its power increased. So very sort of reminiscent to like Kayle, except instead of attacking with them, they sort of need to die off. When she has 16 attack, transform me into Zilani Aspect Bane. So imagine it's a 16/16 overwhelm, and then on her attack, she transforms attacking non-darkened followers into exact copies of me. So I mean, this is essentially game ending, right? You have 2 units on board, you have Zilani, all of a sudden they all turn into 16 attack overwhelm units, which is like absurd, right? Like if you can pull this off, it's kind of absurd. Granted that, you know, it's given only her base form or her base text, you do need, you need 14, so you need 7 units, right, to have died with their powers increased, which is unsure like how difficult that actually is going to be. But I think from another perspective, from just purely deck building, you don't need to focus on, you know, purely just boosting the attack of allies. You have things that, or I mean, you have more cards that boost the attack a lot more, right? You have cards like Redoubled Valor that could like double attack, so maybe you only need like 3, right, to die, and then you double that or something like that. Another cool combo I thought of is like Varus's weapon or Varus's bow. If you level up Varus, you can stack +10 attack onto his bow, and then you equip Kayle with the bow, and all of a sudden she automatically levels up because she has 12 power, right? And not to mention that she probably already has 6 power, and then you give her 10, and then she has double attack, right? So I think there's a lot of cool synergy points between deck building. You can build a deck in a way such that you have a lot of like these buff cards like the gems, the Esmuses, the Lodestones, or you could play with a lot more combat spells like the Pale Cascades, the Celestial Blessings, Varus Bow, whatever it may be, right, to like boost attack and to enable it empowered in other ways. And because you're already in Targon, you have that flexibility because you have good protection tools in your region if you're working towards this sort of like sort of OTK all in on 1 or 2 units kind of combo, right? You have Kayle, you have Zilani, you even have elusives like Wing Messenger, Mihira. So like there's a lot of different threats you can build. There's a lot of different protection spells you have access to. And I think you have a good varied amount of different sort of buffs that you can pair with Kayle. So I think that this on paper is looking to be quite strong because I think your threat density is so high. The definite downside to these things is just the lack of interaction. So unless you're pairing this specifically with something like Demacia, for example, you're gonna lose out on a lot of interaction, which Freljord plus, or I mean, which Targon champ or Targon region pairings generally lacked. So that's like one limiting downside to this sort of aspect. There's no empowered units with Challenger. Kayle doesn't have Challenger. So that's obviously one of the downsides to Targon as this sort of like unit-based mid-range combat kind of archetype. If they don't have Shrima or Demacia, and most preferably Demacia, they generally lack a lot of interaction that helps them stabilize until they get to that turn 6 and 7. So while I think this is really cool, it does just based purely off of regions. It does limit a little bit of where you can put Kayle. It's not like you can build this in a control shell, really, right? Because it is still very relevant on having board-based units. But I think overall there are relatively a lot of synergy points. But it's probably going to end up confined to 1 or 2 regions still, which is the definite unfortunate downside of it all. But I'm very curious to see what it's going to look like. I'm quite excited for Kayle. I think she's definitely the most I don't want to say she's the most interesting because she's probably because it looks on paper that she's not, but I think in relative terms of deck building, I think that she has the most flexibility and freedom to like explore different options for building decks itself. I guess also to mention, the cultist region also has strike spells, right? So cultist region does have the 4-mana strike spell. So something like Varus, Kayle, as I was talking about the bow, there's some potential there as well. So very excited. That's gonna be it for these cards. I know there's a few more empowered cards I don't think they listed here, but we'll cover those in an entire set review before the expansion hits. So look out for that video as well. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hope you guys are excited for the new expansion. And I'll see you guys next time.